The massive council chamber floated in the darkness of space like a metal mountain. Inside its gleaming walls, representatives from 47 different alien species sat in judgment. The air hummed with translators working overtime as angry. Voices rose from every corner of the great hall. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of it all, his hands clasped behind his back. His blue uniform looked plain and simple compared to the elaborate costumes and natural armor of the aliens around him. Next to him, Commander Lisa Hayes checked her tablet one more time, though she already knew the numbers by heart. 17. Human colonies spread across known space. 3 million people who would need to pack up their entire lives and leave. Ambassador Zexthara rose from his seat high above the floor. His crystalline body caught the light and threw it back in sharp. Rainbows across the chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The motion before this council is simple, he said, each word precise and cold. Humanity has proven itself unfit for civilized society. They start wars where others would talk. They fight when others would compromise. They refuse to follow the proper order that has kept peace in this galaxy for 1,000 years. Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his face blank. Around the chamber, alien heads nodded in agreement. The Vortani had always been the most powerful voice in the council, and where they led, others followed. Just last month, Zexthara continued, human colonists on Kepler-7 attacked a hegemony mining operation. They claimed the miners were poisoning their water supply, but proper channels existed for such complaints. Instead of filing reports and waiting for investigation, they chose violence. Lisa leaned close to Jake and whispered, 23 children died from that poisoned water before our people acted. Jake nodded slightly but said nothing. The truth didn't matter here. It never had. A new voice rose from the left side of the chamber. Representative Vox of the hegemony stood, his insect-like arms clicking together as he spoke. Humans cannot be trusted to follow galactic law, Vox said, his words buzzing through the translator. They make their own rules and expect others to accept them. When the Altarian Transport Guild increased shipping rates, human traders simply started their own shipping companies instead of paying the approved prices. They undercut established businesses and disrupted centuries of tradition. More nods around the chamber. More agreement that humanity was a problem that needed solving. Jake thought about those shipping companies. Human traders had started them because the guild was charging rates so high that medicine couldn't reach outer colonies in time to save lives during the plague outbreak 3 years ago. But again, the truth didn't matter. The evidence is clear, said Councillor Morith of the Altarian Trade Federation. Humans are too aggressive, too unpredictable. They cannot adapt to civilized society. They must be removed before they cause more damage. The vote began immediately. Jake watched as species after species raised their hands in favor of exile. The Vortani, of course, the hegemony, the Trade Federation. One by one, they chose to cast humanity out of known space. Then something unexpected happened. Elder Korth of the Zelrani stood up slowly. His ancient form moved with difficulty, but his voice was strong when he spoke. I wish to address this council before the vote concludes, he said. Zexthara looked annoyed. Elder Korth, your species has already voted in favor of the motion. I speak not from my species, but from experience, Korth replied. I am old enough to remember when the Devourers last came from beyond the galaxy's edge. I remember how they swept through system after system, consuming everything in their path. I remember how our great fleets fell before them like wheat before a storm. The chamber grew quiet. The Devourer Wars were ancient history, the stuff of legends and cautionary tales told to young beings across the galaxy. I also remember, Korth continued, who finally stopped them. It was not our advanced technology. It was not our superior numbers. It was species like humans. Species that refused to give up when defeat seemed certain. Species that fought with such fury and determination that even the Devourers learned to fear them. He turned to look directly at Jake and Lisa. You make a grave error this day, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Humans do not simply disappear when exiled, they adapt. They grow stronger, and they remember who cast them out. Zexthara waved a dismissive hand. The ramblings of an old fool who has spent too much time studying primitive species. The vote continues. But Jake saw something in Korth's eyes, a warning, a prophecy. A promise. The final tally was overwhelming. 42 species voted for exile, only 5 abstained. None voted against. The decision is final, Zexthara announced. All human colonies and settlements must be evacuated from civilized space within 1 standard galactic year. Any human vessels found in Council territory after that deadline will be destroyed on sight. Jake stepped forward. For the first time during the entire proceedings, he spoke. We'll need transport ships for the evacuation, he said calmly, and supplies for the journey. You may purchase what you need at standard rates, Zexthara replied. The Council bears no responsibility for the logistics of your departure. Lisa did quick calculations in her head. Standard rates would bankrupt every human colony combined. They would have to build or steal what they needed. As the session ended and aliens began filing out of the chamber, Elder Korth approached the human delegation. His guards stayed back, giving him space to speak privately. Where will you go? He asked quietly. Beyond the galactic edge, Jake replied. Into the void between galaxies. It's the only place they can't follow us. Korth nodded slowly. That is a hard path. Few species could survive such a journey. We'll survive, Lisa said firmly. We always do. Yes, Korth said, looking between them with those ancient eyes. I believe you will. And when you return, the galaxy will not be the same place that cast you out. He walked away without explaining what he meant, leaving Jake and Lisa alone in the vast chamber. Outside the windows, human ships were already gathering. Word of the vote had spread quickly through hyperspace communications. Colony ships, military vessels, civilian transports, research stations, all coming together for the greatest exodus in human history. Jake looked at the alien ships moving to intercept them, already taking positions to ensure humans couldn't change their minds about leaving. 1 year, he said quietly. We'll be ready, Lisa replied. Neither of them knew that in 5 years, when they returned to this same system, they would no longer be the same species that was being cast out today. The void changes everything it touches, and humans were about to learn just how much they could change when survival demanded it. 5 years had passed since the great exodus began, and the void between galaxies was no longer empty. Where once there had been only darkness and distant stars, now a massive fleet of human ships drifted through the cosmic night. They called themselves the Terran Nomad Alliance, though most people just said, the fleet. When they talked about home. Admiral Sam Carter stood on the bridge of the flagship New Horizon, watching the daily reports scroll across his screens. The ship was enormous, built from pieces of a dozen different vessels that had been welded, bolted, and somehow made to work together. It looked nothing like the sleek council ships they had once admired, but it was theirs, and it worked. Daily population report, Admiral, said Lieutenant Amy Foster, handing him a tablet. Birth rate is still climbing. We had 43 babies born yesterday across the fleet. Sam nodded and smiled slightly. The children born out here in the void were different from their parents in ways that scientists were still trying to understand. They called them void-born, and they were remarkable. In the deep laboratories of the generation ship New Tokyo, Dr. Kate Phillips bent over her microscope for the 100th time that day. What she saw there still amazed her, even after 5 years of study. Human DNA was changing, adapting to life in deep space in ways that should have been impossible. Computer, begin recording, she said. Day 1837 of the Void Journey. Subject analysis continues to show remarkable adaptations. Exposure to exotic radiation during our passage through dark space has triggered evolutionary changes that are accelerating with each generation. She stood and walked to the window that showed the endless black between galaxies. Somewhere out there, the council species were living their comfortable lives on their safe worlds. never knowing what they had unleashed by forcing humanity into this harsh environment. The changes are most pronounced in the Voidborn children, she continued. Enhanced reflexes, improved cognitive function, and most surprisingly, a form of limited telepathic connection between humans in close proximity. The children seem to share thoughts and emotions in ways their parents cannot. 2 decks below, 16-year-old Alex Turner was proving her point. He sat in the navigation center of New Horizon, his eyes closed, calculating hyperspace jumps, in his head with accuracy that made the ship's computers seem slow and clumsy. Around him, other Voidborn teenagers worked at tasks that would have required teams of adults just a few years ago. Jump calculation complete, Alex announced, opening his bright green eyes. We can reach the Dead Star system in 6 hours, 14 minutes. There's a 97% chance of finding rare metals in the asteroid field there. Captain Pete Johnson, who was old enough to remember Earth, shook his head in wonder. How do you know that, son? Alex shrugged. I can feel it. The way space bends around heavy elements, the way gravity flows. It's like reading a map. His sister Maya Turner looked up from her workstation across the room. Even though they were 12 feet apart, Alex knew exactly what she was thinking. The connection between Voidborn siblings was especially strong. The Zelrani research data we recovered last month, Maya said, finishing Alex's thought. It shows patterns in stellar formation that match what Alex is sensing. Captain Johnson had given up trying to understand how the Voidborn knew things. He just accepted that they did and made sure to listen when they spoke on the military training deck of the battleship Defiance. Lieutenant Colonel Don Rodriguez watched his soldiers practice. These weren't the same desperate refugees who had fled known space 5 years ago. They moved like a pack of wolves, each one aware of what the others were doing without needing to speak. Begin Combat Simulation 7, Rodriguez called out. The holographic enemies appeared instantly, armed with weapons that matched the best Council technology. The human soldiers didn't just fight them, they destroyed them with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They seemed to know where each enemy would move before the enemy knew it themselves. Sergeant Lucy Kim flowed through the simulation like water, her enhanced reflexes making her faster than any baseline human had ever been. Next to her, Corporal Mike Davis provided covering fire with precision that would have been impossible for their ancestors. Together, they cleared the entire simulation in under 3 minutes. New record, Rodriguez announced, though he wasn't surprised. Every day his people got faster, stronger, more deadly. The void was forging them into something the galaxy had never seen. In the civilian sectors, life had found its own rhythm. The colony ships had become floating cities where children played in parks built from salvaged metal and grew vegetables in hydroponic gardens that their parents had designed from scraps. They learned history from teachers who remembered the exile, but they also learned new things that no human textbook had ever contained. Young Sally Brooke could sense the health of plants just by touching them. Her friend Tony Wells could repair electronic equipment by running his hands over it, somehow knowing exactly what was wrong. These weren't special talents every Voidborn child seemed to develop. Abilities that amazed their parents. The adults were changing too, though more slowly. Extended exposure to the exotic radiation of deep space was awakening parts of the human brain that had been dormant for millions of years. People reported dreams that turned out to be memories from other crew members. Couples found they could sense each other's emotions across vast distances. Dr. Phillips had theories about what was happening, but the truth was stranger than any theory. Humanity was evolving at the speed of necessity, adapting to an environment that should have killed them. The fleet had grown as well. Ships that had started the journey as simple transports had been modified and expanded. New vessels had been built from asteroids and salvaged materials. The humans had become master scavengers, able to build anything they needed from whatever they could find. Admiral Carter reviewed the tactical reports each evening before sleep. His fleet now included 12 major battleships, 47 cruisers, and over 200 smaller vessels. Each one was unique, designed by human engineers who had learned to think beyond the limitations of Council technology. But the real weapon wasn't the ships. It was the people inside them. 3 million humans who had been cast out and left to die had instead become something more than human. They were still recognizably themselves. They still laughed and cried and loved and hoped. But they were also something new. At night, when the fleet drifted through the endless dark, parents told their children stories about the worlds they had lost. But the children weren't sad about those worlds. They had never known them. To the Voidborn, the fleet was home, the void was familiar, and the galaxy that had rejected their parents was just another place that might someday need to learn what humans had become. The transformation was nearly complete, though no one knew it yet. In just a few more months, the first distress signal would reach them from the galaxy's edge. The Devourers would return, and the species that had cast humanity out would discover exactly what 5 years in the void had created. They were no longer the same species that had begged for mercy before the Galactic Council. There was something far more dangerous, and they were almost ready to show the galaxy what that meant. The distress signal came through hyperspace like a scream in the darkness. Captain Ben Walsh was drinking coffee in his quarters aboard the light cruiser Defiance when the communications officer burst through his door without knocking. "Sir, we're picking up an emergency transmission from the galaxy's edge," Ensign Carl Price said, his face pale with excitement and fear. "It's a Zalrani research vessel. They're under attack." Ben set down his coffee and followed Carl to the bridge. The message was playing on repeat, filled with static and the sound of weapons fire. Through the noise, he could hear a Zalrani voice speaking in broken standard. "This is research vessel Starseeker. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Main engines offline. Request immediate assistance from any ships in range." Lieutenant Maya Turner looked up from her tactical station. At 19, she was young even by Voidborn standards, but her abilities made her invaluable to the fleet. Her green eyes were bright with concentration as she processed information that was flowing to her through channels her parents couldn't understand. "Captain, I'm sensing something wrong about this," she said. "The attackers aren't using normal weapons. There's something off about their energy signatures. They feel hungry." Ben had learned to trust Voidborn intuition over the past 5 years. If Maya said something felt wrong, it was worth investigating. "How far out are they?" he asked. 3 hours at maximum speed," replied Navigator Jim Park. "But sir, that would take us right to the edge of Council space." "If they detect us?" "The exile period ended 2 months ago," Ben said firmly. "Technically, we're allowed to be there. Besides, someone needs help." He opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Captain Walsh to Admiral Carter. We have a situation." 30 minutes later, a small task force was racing toward the distress signal. Along with Defiance, the fleet had sent the heavy cruiser Thunder and 2 destroyer escorts. It wasn't much, but Ben hoped it would be enough for a simple rescue mission. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the dead system where the Zalrani ship was hiding. What they found made even the experienced human crew stop and stare. The Zalrani research vessel Starseeker was a beautiful ship, all flowing curves and elegant lines that spoke of a peaceful civilization's finest engineering. But it was being torn apart by creatures that seemed to have crawled out of humanity's worst nightmares. The attacking ships were biomechanical horrors that defied easy description. They looked like they had been grown rather than built, with writhing tentacles instead of weapons and hulls that pulsed like living flesh. Worst of all, they seemed to exist partially outside normal space, flickering in and out of reality as they attacked. "Dear God," whispered Weapons Officer Steve Grant. "What are those things?" Maya Turner's face had gone white. Through her enhanced senses, she could feel the wrongness radiating from the alien vessels like heat from a fire. "Devourers," she whispered. "I don't know how I know, but that's what they are. They eat everything." Planets, stars, entire civilizations. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. The Devourer Wars were ancient history, myths, and legends from before. The current galactic civilization had formed. They weren't supposed to be real. "All ships, this is Walsh," he said into his communicator. "Attack Formation Delta. Protect the Zelrani vessel at all cost. The human ships moved with fluid precision that would have amazed any council observer. They had learned to fight together during their years in the void, and their coordination was flawless. But nothing had prepared them for what happened next. The Devourers turned toward them with movements that hurt to watch, as if they were bending space itself to change direction. Their weapons were unlike anything in the Galactic. Databases, beams of pure entropy that aged everything they touched by centuries and seconds. Defiance took the first hit and then expected to die. Instead, he watched in amazement as the Devourer weapons splashed harmlessly against their shields. The exotic radiation that had changed humanity during their exile had also changed their technology in ways they were only beginning to understand. Return. Fire, he ordered. The human weapons had been built with salvaged parts and desperate ingenuity, but they cut through Devourer hulls like knives through paper. The biomechanical ships screamed, actually screamed, as human plasma bolts tore them apart. Maya Turner stood at her station with her eyes closed. Her consciousness expanded across the entire battlefield, through the neural link that connected. All Voidborn, she was coordinating the attack with a precision that no computer could match. "Target the large one on the left," she said, her voice strange and distant. Its hunger patterns show it's the pack leader. The Thunder's heavy guns swiveled to target the creature Maya had identified. The massive plasma cannon charged for 3 seconds, then released a bolt of contained starfire that completely vaporized the Devourer command ship. The remaining creatures seemed to pause, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. In that moment of hesitation, the human destroyers moved in for the kill. Their crews worked with inhuman efficiency, each person knowing exactly what the others were doing without needing to communicate. Within 20 minutes, the last Devourer ship was nothing but scattered atoms drifting in space. The Zelrani research vessel floated safely in the middle of the debris field, its crew alive but shaken. "Unknown vessels, this is Commander Yethpala of the Starseeker," came the transmission. "We owe you our lives. May we ask who you are?" Ben opened a channel to the Zelrani ship. "This is Captain Ben Walsh of the Terran vessel Defiance. We received your distress call." There was a long pause. "Terran? But humans were exiled from this region 5 years ago. You should not be here." "The exile period ended 2 months ago," Ben replied. "We have as much right to be here as anyone else." Another pause, longer this time. "Permission to come aboard your vessel, Captain Walsh? There are things we must discuss." An hour later, Commander Yethpala stood on the bridge of Defiance, staring at the humans around him with barely concealed amazement. These were not the same desperate refugees who had been cast out of civilized space. They moved with confidence and purpose, and there was something in their eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond anything the peaceful galaxy could provide. "Those creatures," he said finally, "the Devourers. They have been appearing at random locations along the galaxy's edge for the past 6 months. Our best fleets have engaged them 12 times and suffered total defeat in every encounter. You destroyed them as if they were nothing." Maya Turner looked at him with those unnaturally bright eyes. "They weren't that hard to fight once you understood what they were. They exist partially outside normal space, but they're still bound by certain rules. You just have to know which rules they can't break." Yethpala stared at her. "You learned this in 20 minutes of combat?" "Our scientists have been studying Devourer remains for months without reaching such conclusions. We learned it in 5 years of living where we don't belong," Maya replied simply. The Zelrani commander turned to Ben. "Captain, I must ask, where have your people been during the exile? What has happened to humanity?" Ben looked out at the stars that no longer seemed quite as distant as they once had. "We went to the place between galaxies. We learned to survive where nothing should be able to live. And we discovered that when you cast someone out into the darkness, you have to be prepared for what the darkness makes them become." As the human ships prepared to return to the void, Yethpala sent a priority message to the Zelrani homeworld. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. The humans had returned, and they were no longer the same species that had been exiled. They had become something far more dangerous and far more necessary than anyone had imagined. The galaxy was about to learn that some consequences take time to arrive, but when they do, they change everything. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any in recorded history. Where once 47 species had gathered in the Great Chamber, now barely 20 representatives remained. The rest had recalled their delegates to defend their dying homeworlds from the Devourer advance. Ambassador Zexthara stood at the center of the chamber, but his crystalline form no longer gleamed with confidence. His home system had fallen 3 days ago, consumed by the biomechanical horrors that swept through space like a plague. Millions of his people were dead, their worlds reduced to lifeless rock. "The situation grows worse by the hour," he announced. To the nearly empty chamber. "The Vortani Third Fleet engaged a Devourer swarm near Rigel Station yesterday. Only 2 ships escaped to report the encounter. The enemy advances faster than our intelligence predicted." Representative Vox of the Hegemony clicked his insect arms together nervously. "My species has lost 7 core systems in the past month. Our military analysts say we have perhaps 6 weeks before the Devourers reach our capital worlds. All of our advanced weapons are useless against them." Around the chamber, the few remaining delegates shared looks of desperation. The greatest military powers in the galaxy were falling like dominoes before an enemy they barely understood. Elder Korth of the Zelrani rose slowly from his seat. At his great age, even standing was difficult, but his voice carried clearly through the chamber. "I have received reports from our border scouts," he said. "Reports that some of you may find interesting." Zexthara turned toward him with irritation. "Elder Korth, we appreciate the Zelrani intelligence network, but now is not the time for lengthy briefings. We need solutions, not more bad news." "The news I bring is not bad," Korth replied calmly. 6 days ago, one of our research vessels was attacked by Devourers near the galactic edge. The ship was moments from destruction when help arrived. "Help from whom?" asked Councillor Moraith of the Trade Federation. "We have no military assets in that region." "The help came from humans," Korth said simply. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates looked confused, as if they had forgotten that humans existed. "Humans?" Zexthara's voice carried disbelief. "The primitive species we exiled 5 years ago? What could they possibly do against Devourers?" Korth smiled, an expression that looked strange on his ancient features. "They destroyed the entire Devourer attack force in 20 minutes. My people watched human ships tear through biomechanical horrors that had defeated our best military units. The humans made it look easy." Representative Vox buzzed in agitation. "Impossible. Humans had basic technology when we exiled them. They could barely maintain their own colonies." "That was 5 years ago," Korth said. "My commander reported that these were not the same humans who left our space. They had evolved, adapted, become something far more dangerous than what we remembered." He activated a holographic display showing the battle footage his ship had recorded. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as sleek human vessels moved with impossible coordination, their weapons cutting through Devourer ships like they were made of paper. "Notice how they fight," Korth said as the footage played. "No wasted movements, perfect timing, absolute cooperation between ships. They function like a single organism with many parts." The footage showed Maya Turner standing on the Bridge of Defiance. Her eyes closed in concentration as she coordinated the entire battle through abilities that no baseline humanoid possessed. "The young female you see there appears to be controlling multiple ships simultaneously through some form of telepathic link," Korth continued. "Our sensors detected neural activity patterns that should be impossible for any known species." Zexthara stared at the display. "Genetic modification. They must have altered themselves during the exile period." "Perhaps," Korth agreed. "But altered. Into what? And more importantly, what will they want from the galaxy that cast them out?" Before anyone could answer, an aide rushed into the chamber carrying urgent message crystals. She whispered frantically to several delegates, and their expressions grew even more grim. The Altarian Defense Force has been destroyed, announced Counselor Morith, his voice hollow. 47 ships gone without a trace. The Devourers are now 3 systems away from our capital. Similar reports came from other species. The hegemony had lost an entire colonial sector. The Vortani military command was in full retreat. Everywhere the story was the same: total defeat against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. We need to contact the humans, Elder Korth said into the growing panic. They may be our only hope. Contact them and say what? Zexthara demanded. We exiled them from civilized space. We told them they were unfit for galactic society. We threatened to destroy any human ship found in Council territory. Why would they help us? Because that is what humans do, Korth replied. They help, even when they have every reason not to. It is both their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness. But even as they debated, events were moving beyond their control. In the void between galaxies, Admiral Sam Carter stood on the bridge of New Horizon, reading reports from human scout ships that had penetrated deep into Council space. The Devourer advance is accelerating, reported Captain Linda Shun from the communications station. Our long-range sensors show at least 40 major swarms moving toward the galactic core. At current rates, they'll reach the primary trade routes within 2 weeks. General Patricia Stone, commander of the Terran military forces, studied the tactical displays with the enhanced perception that 5 years in the void had given her. The patterns were clear to her altered senses in ways they would never have been to her old baseline human mind. They're not just attacking randomly, she said. There's a strategy here. They're targeting the most heavily populated systems first, the ones with the most biomass to consume. Each victory makes them stronger for the next battle. Carter nodded. Grimly, around him, the bridge crew worked with the fluid efficiency that marked all void-adapted humans. They had grown beyond their old limitations, but they had also retained the core values that made them human. Recommendations, General? He asked. We go in, Stone said without hesitation. Not to save the Council species, but to stop the Devourers before they consume enough biomass to threaten other galaxies. This is bigger than old grudges. The Council will expect us to beg for permission to help them, Carter pointed out. They may even demand concessions, reparations for past grievances. Stone smiled, an expression that would have terrified any Council representative who saw it. Admiral, we don't need their permission anymore. We outgun every fleet in known space, and our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. We'll save their civilizations if we choose to, but we'll do it on our terms. Carter looked out at the human fleet assembled around New Horizon. Thousands of ships, crewed by 3 million people who had been cast out and forged into something harder than diamond. They were no longer refugees begging for acceptance. They were a force that could reshape the galaxy according to their own vision. Send the message to all ships, he ordered. We're going home. And this time, we're going to make sure everyone understands exactly what humanity has become. The greatest fleet in galactic history began its final approach toward known space, carrying with it the consequences of a decision made 5 years ago in a council chamber that no longer had the power to enforce its will. The Battle of Kepler Prime began at dawn on a Tuesday and lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the course of galactic history had changed forever. Admiral Sam Carter stood on the bridge of New Horizon as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Before them lay the greatest Devourer swarm ever assembled, thousands of biomechanical horrors that had already consumed 3 star systems on their way to the Council homeworlds. Enemy count confirmed, reported Captain Linda Chun. 4,700 Devourer vessels of various sizes. They're moving in formation toward Kepler Prime Station. Through the viewports, Carter could see the massive Council station that had once been the symbol of galactic civilization. Now it hung dark and damaged in space, its defensive fleets scattered or destroyed. Only a few hundred alien ships remained to guard the billions of beings sheltering inside. They're not going to last another hour, observed General Patricia Stone, studying the tactical displays. The Devourers have them completely surrounded. Carter opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Carter. Today we face an enemy that wants to devour everything in this galaxy. They've already consumed dozens of worlds and killed billions of beings. We're here to stop them. He paused, looking out at the human fleet that stretched across space like a metallic constellation. 3,000 ships crewed by people who had been cast out and transformed by their journey through the void. 5 years ago, the species we're about to save voted to exile us from civilized space, he continued. They said we were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Today, we're going to show them exactly how dangerous we can be when we choose to protect instead of destroy. The human fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Each ship knew exactly where it needed to be without any communication between vessels. The Voidborn children who served as tactical coordinators were linked in a neural network that spanned the entire fleet, allowing them to fight as a single organism. Maya Turner sat in the command center of New Horizon. Her consciousness expanded across all 3,000 human ships. Through her enhanced senses, she could feel the hunger radiating from the Devourer swarm like heat from a furnace. But she could also sense something else, patterns in their movement that revealed weaknesses. The large command ships in the center, she said, her voice strange and distant. They're coordinating the entire swarm through some kind of hive-mind connection. If we can sever those links, the smaller ships will become confused and vulnerable. Her brother Alex Turner nodded from his position at the navigation station. Though they were on different ships, the connection between Voidborn siblings allowed them to coordinate perfectly across vast distances. I can see the weak points in their formation, Alex said. There are gaps in their defensive pattern every 43 seconds when they pulse their coordination signals. We can punch through during those windows. The first wave of human ships struck the Devourer formation like a sword thrust. Where Council weapons had proven useless against the alien hulls, human plasma cannons tore through biomechanical armor as if it were paper. The exotic radiation that had changed humanity during their exile had also transformed their technology in ways that made them uniquely suited to fight creatures from outside normal space. Captain Ben Walsh led the second wave aboard Defiance, his ship cutting deep into the enemy formation. Around him, his crew worked with inhuman efficiency, each person knowing exactly what the others were doing without needing to speak. They had learned to fight together during 5 years in the void, and their coordination was flawless. Target. The cluster ships on Vector 774, called out Weapons Officer Steve Grant. Maya's showing me their weak points through the link. The ship's main cannon swiveled to target a massive Devourer vessel that looked like it had been grown, rather than built. The plasma bolt that struck it was charged with energies that the void had taught humans to harness, and the alien ship simply ceased to exist. All across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Human ships darted between Devourer formations. With impossible agility, their enhanced crews reacting faster than any baseline humanoid could have managed. When the aliens tried to adapt their tactics, the humans adapted faster. The Devourers had never faced an enemy like this. For eons, they had swept through galaxy after galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Species might fight bravely for a time, but they always fell eventually. These humans were different. They seemed to know what the Devourers would do before the aliens themselves knew it. Command Ship Formation Delta is breaking apart, reported Maya Turner, her consciousness split between dozens of different tactical situations. The hive mind link is weakening. Press the attack on their coordination nodes. Alex Turner's voice came through the fleet communication system. Jump coordinates confirmed for the final assault. All ships prepare for synchronized hyperspace. Attack. We're going straight for their heart. What happened next had never been attempted in galactic history. 3,000 human ships made simultaneous microjumps, appearing inside the Devourer formation at precisely calculated positions. The aliens found themselves surrounded by enemies who had materialized from nowhere, each human ship exactly where it needed to be to do maximum damage. The battle became a slaughter. Devourer command ships exploded in chains of secondary detonations. as human weapons found their critical systems with surgical precision. Smaller alien vessels, cut off from their controlling intelligence, began firing randomly or simply drifting helplessly through space. Admiral Carter watched from New Horizon as the last major Devourer vessel died in a burst of exotic fire. Around the human fleet, the debris of 4,000 alien ships drifted in space like the remains of a nightmare. "Enemy fleet destroyed," reported General Stone. "No human casualties. All ships reporting minimal damage." In the aftermath of the battle, representatives from the surviving council species approached the human fleet. Their messages were filled with gratitude and amazement, but also with a new kind of fear. The humans who had saved them were clearly no longer the same species that had been exiled. 5 years ago, Ambassador Zexthara's ship docked with New Horizon 3 hours after the battle ended. When he entered the flagship's conference room, he found himself facing the same human who had stood silently in the council chamber 5 years ago. But Captain Jake Morrison was changed, enhanced like all his people by their time in the void. "You saved us," Zexthara said, his crystalline form flickering with uncertainty. "The Devourers would have consumed every world in the galaxy if you hadn't intervened," Morrison nodded calmly. "We did what needed to be done." "The Devourers were a threat to all life, not just the species that exiled us." "But why?" Zexthara asked. "After what we did to you, after we cast you out and left you to die in the void, why did you come back to help us?" Morrison looked out through the viewport at the human fleet that now controlled the space around Kepler Prime. Ships that had been built from desperation and necessity, crewed by people who had been transformed by 5 years of exile into something far beyond what they had once been. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We help, even when we have every reason not to." Elder Korth understood that when he warned you 5 years ago. He turned back to face the alien ambassador. "But understand this, we are not your subjects anymore. We're not asking for permission to exist in this galaxy. We're not begging for acceptance into your civilized society. We've moved beyond the need for your approval." Zexthara stared at him. "Then what do you want from us?" "Nothing," Morrison replied. "We're offering you something instead. Protection, guidance, a chance to learn from species who have faced the darkness and emerged stronger. But it will be on our terms, not yours." As human ships establish patrol routes around the surviving council worlds, the representatives of 47 species began to understand the true consequences of their decision 5 years ago. They had intended to exile a troublesome species and instead had created their new masters. The galaxy would never be the same, and the choice of what it would become was no longer theirs to make.